LinkedIn has blocked the profiles of some American journalists in China. The company says it's over prohibited content. The U.S. stops a Chinese student from entering the U.S. He was sent back after arriving at an airport in Houston. It's the fourth time it's happened this year. Tensions persist between Australia and China. It's been a year and a half since China answered Australia's phone calls. The Australian Prime Minister says Xi Jinping won't pick up. The organizer of an international sports game took down Taiwan's flag to comply with Beijing's policy. To show support for the island, nearly a dozen countries asked the organizer to have their national flags removed too. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. First, we turn to LinkedIn. The professional networking site has blocked several American journalists' profiles in China, citing prohibited content. One of the profiles belongs to Bethany Allen Abraham, a China reporter at news website Axios. She tweeted, "I used to have to wait for Chinese government censors or censors employed by Chinese companies in China to do this kind of thing. Now a U.S. company is paying its own employees to censor Americans." Another reporter whose profile has also been blocked also tweeted about the potential reasons behind the move. She wrote, "Could be many things, from this year's piece about Uyghurs in exile to my essay on democracy." LinkedIn says for members who are blocked in China, their profiles are still visible in other countries where LinkedIn operates. And an advocacy organization is voicing concerns. In a statement, Pan America CEO writes, if LinkedIn's behavior is normalized, it sends a message to companies across the globe that it is business as usual to enforce Beijing's censorship demands globally. China is one of LinkedIn's largest user bases, and LinkedIn is the only major American social media company allowed to operate there. But that comes with a cost, which is to censor its users in China. In comparison, other tech companies that rejected China's censorship are still blocked there, like Facebook and Twitter. LinkedIn is owned by Microsoft. Last year, Beijing made over 40 requests to LinkedIn to remove content, and it took down most of them. But it appears that Chinese officials think LinkedIn is not censoring enough. This March, authorities summoned the company over its content regulation. It gave LinkedIn 30 days to clean up the content on its website. That's according to a Wall Street Journal report. And 3 months later, some academics and reporters found their LinkedIn profiles were blocked in China for containing sensitive keywords. And one of them reacted by posting a Twitter thread, saying that under education on their LinkedIn profile, they mentioned in one line that their degree essay in modern Chinese history was written about the Tiananmen Square massacre. LinkedIn's response was to censor their entire profile for Chinese users. As LinkedIn blocked several American journalists' profiles in China, the U.S. government blocked a Chinese student from entering the States. The student was sent back to China after arriving at an American airport. He is the fourth Chinese student the U.S. has sent back to China in this way, this year. The Chinese embassy in Washington said on Wednesday the student failed to pass scrutiny at the Houston airport. U.S. officials held him for interrogation for over 2 days. The reason behind the deportation is not yet known, but recently the U.S. has strengthened its review of Chinese students who want to attend U.S. universities. Last month, 3 Chinese students were sent back to China while trying to enter the U.S. Houston airport. That's after photos of military training sessions were found in their mobile phones. It's the result of a policy issued by former President Trump that blocks visas for Chinese students and researchers who have ties to China's military. That includes Chinese universities participating in the CCP's military programs. U.S. intelligence says they believe thousands of Chinese students and researchers are linked to programs aiming to get sensitive information in high-tech and other areas from Western countries. On top of that, human rights abusers' children face a similar situation. A Chinese student who was planning to study in America was denied a visa earlier this year because his father works for the police. Last year, the Trump administration sanctioned a number of Chinese government officials. Among them was a low-level police officer. He was sanctioned for involvement in persecuting practitioners of Falun Gong, a spiritual movement in China. Another story about tensions with China, this time with Australia. It looks like CCP leader Xi Jinping is giving Australia the cold shoulder. Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison revealed in a recent interview that it's been over a year since Xi Jinping answered his phone calls. In an interview with CBS, Morrison agreed that things are not very friendly at the moment, saying there are difficulties in the China-Australia relationship. However, he says those difficulties are determined by China. While Xi Jinping spoke with U.S. President Joe Biden earlier this month, it looks like he's hesitant to take Canberra's call. Morrison says the phone is always open at our end. There is no Australian obstacle to direct dialogue at a political level between Australia and China. But that opportunity the China side have not shown an interest in. And on another front, more and more countries seem to be uniting in their support of Taiwan, this time in freediving. The International Association for the Development of Apnea removed Taiwan's national flag from its live streaming of this year's Depth World Championship. It is suspected that IADA acted under pressure from Beijing. 5 Taiwanese athletes participated in the competition. But without any warning, the organizer removed their national flag from the sports streaming on Tuesday, the only flag to be removed among the 44 participants that day. IADA's president, Alexandra Russo, apologized to the Taiwanese team, but said he had no plans to put the flag back. Japan showed support for Taiwan. The Japan IADA Association asked the organizer to remove Japan's flag as well, saying they are willing to share the same pain with Taiwan. And other countries, including Russia, the U.S., and Germany, 11 countries altogether asked IADA to remove their flags in support of Taiwan. 2 decades ago, Washington believed trade and investment could make China more democratic. But how did it actually play out? A China expert and trade negotiator explains the issue on the Epoch Times American Thought Leaders program.
It's been 20 years since China joined the World Trade Organization. Capital from Western countries has made China richer, but far from democratic and free. Especially in recent years, the ruling Communist Party has intensified repression both at home and abroad. Things seem not to have turned out as democratic nations had hoped.
We were fooling ourselves.
Clyde Prestwitz was a leader in the first U.S. trade mission to China in the 1980s. He served as an advisor to 4 U.S. presidents, both Republican and Democrat. 2 decades ago, the two parties both argued that economic engagement would automatically liberalize China, similar to what President Bill Clinton said in 1997. That by working with China and expanding areas of cooperation, dealing forthrightly with our differences, we can advance fundamental American interests and values.
And they were all convinced that it was going to be a liberal, free market, democratic world.
But in reality, Beijing is pouring some of those riches into military aggression, like fighting with Japan and the Philippines over disputed islands in the South China Sea.
It's now obvious that China is not going to become like us.
Beijing claims most of the vast South China Sea as its own, despite protests from various neighbors.
And so China is building its own order. You know, it's not that they want to become part of our order or we want them to become part of it. They don't want anything to do with our order.
But they kind of pretend that they do.
Well, they try to make use of the order that we have created. I mean, they're in the UN. We created the UN. But what they do is that they try to find ways to operate and manipulate in the UN to block where we want to go or to push the UN in directions that China wants to go. And I mean, you can't complain about that. All the countries are in the UN. Everybody wants the best deal they can get. Chinese happen to be very good at figuring out how to control these kinds of organizations and staff them.
Prestwitz says the U.S. gravely underestimated the Chinese Communist Party's capabilities and determination. Since coming to power, party leader Xi Jinping has cracked down on internet speech and jailed a variety of critics.
The more a free world entity invests in China and helps to strengthen this anti-free speech, anti-liberty, anti-soul Communist Party, the more it's not about money, it's about fundamental human values.
This year, Prestwitz published a new book. In it, he points out something important.
He says, The fundamental threat, to be clear, is not the people of China. Taiwan and Hong Kong demonstrate not only that Chinese people can operate democratic governments, but that when they are able to speak freely, they prefer them. The threat is the Chinese Communist Party and its ambition and ability to create a global authoritarian order. There's a lot in this line.
Yeah, but it's true. And I think particularly, looking at Hong Kong today, you can see dramatically the essence of the conflict. These kids who organized the celebration or the commemoration of Tiananmen Square demonstrations in 1989. In Hong Kong, of course, that date has been memorialized every year since. Now, some of the students who organized those commemorations are being put in jail. There's not going to be any more commemorations, and the records of those commemorations are being erased. So the Chinese Communist Party doesn't want anybody to know about that, or to refer that, or they just want to get it out of history and make it a non-event.
The Hong Kong event he's referring to is held annually to mark the anniversary of a bloody crackdown in 1989, when military troops quashed student-led pro-democracy protests in Beijing's Tiananmen Square. Early in September, China and the U.S. held a virtual meeting to discuss climate change. During those talks, China made an unexpected request.
I'll read it to you. Beijing demands U.S. fulfill wish list in exchange for cooperation on climate change.
Right. This is so interesting, isn't it? That here's China, the biggest emitter globally, double America's emissions. And China's saying, well, we can't do anything about that unless you Americans talk more nicely to us and respond to our ridiculous requests, our demands from you. So I think, this is a revelation, I think an unwitting revelation by China of its true self. Effectively, it's not honest. Effectively, it doesn't give a damn about emissions. What it gives a damn about is maintaining the power of the Chinese Communist Party.
But will China ever become democratic? Many in the past believed a democratic China was a not-so-distant possibility. But today, as the Communist Party continues to increase restrictions on political speech and opposition, few see this as a realistic scenario.
Now we turn to China. As winter nears, China is trying to quell fears about power shortages. On Wednesday, Beijing demanded that railway companies and local authorities ship vital coal suppliers to utilities.
Fear of power shortages in China are soaring just as winter approaches. The party now seeking to put those fears to rest. On Wednesday, Beijing ordered railway companies and local authorities to ship their coal supplies to utilities. That's as China's key industrial regions grapple with power cuts, especially in 3 northeastern provinces. Now the province's nearly 100 million residents are suffering too. This convenience store worker in Shenyang said the subway was still in operation, but water and electricity were all cut, with people buying candles and borrowing portable chargers. The restrictions come after a collision of tight coal supplies, tougher emissions standards, and high manufacturing demand, which pushed the price of coal to record levels. And along with it came nationwide curbs on power use. In Shenyang City, home to 8 million people, a power cut hit the city for around 8 hours last week, leaving streets in complete darkness.
It was completely dark. I could see nothing because the power was cut from everything. I ride an electric scooter and the light of the scooter was on. Everything else was dark.
Officials have assured residents that all households will have power and heating. But power rationing still remains in effect.
The power shortage in China has spread to at least 20 provinces, and it's pushing up the cost of key commodities. For example, cement prices escalated repeatedly, some items tripling in value in just 10 days. In mid-September, a cement producer in the southeastern city of Nanchang announced a price hike of $5. And just 5 days later, another rise of $13. 4 days after that, one more rise of $16. The Southern Autonomous Region of Guangxi imposed a restriction, saying cement production for September cannot exceed 40% of the monthly average from first half of the year. And the coming month's quota will be adjusted according to September's production. Data from Digital Cement Network shows that the average price of cement has risen for 3 consecutive weeks since the start of September. The Deputy Secretary General of China Cement Association says in addition to a power shortage, rising coal prices are adding pressure. A commentator tells Radio Free Asia these energy restrictions are said to be caused by industrial policy adjustments from Beijing. Since the cement market's peak season is approaching, its price is expected to keep rising. Struggling Chinese mega developer Evergrande missed a second offshore bond payment on Wednesday, but on Thursday, the company caught up with a partial payment. It's reportedly the world's most indebted real estate developer, and it looks like it's unable to make good on its debts. It was supposed to make a nearly $50 million interest payment on a dollar bond. That's less than a week after it also missed paying over $80 million on another foreign bond. With liabilities of $300 billion, Evergrande has sparked concerns of a messy collapse that could spread through China's financial system and reverberate around the world. Earlier Wednesday, the firm said it was selling a stake it owned in one bank to help cover some of its debts. Rating agency Fitch has downgraded Evergrande from CC to C, or near default. Beijing didn't take a stance on if it would resolve the crisis with a bailout. But analysts say it's unlikely to let it collapse and cause unrest in the country. In recent days, state-owned or backed firms are reportedly planning to purchase some Evergrande assets to reduce risk. Evergrande said on Wednesday that it would sell a $1.5 billion stake it owns in a Chinese bank to a state-owned asset management company. Separately, construction has resumed on nearly 20 developments in South China's Pearl River Delta. This, according to the company's WeChat post earlier this week. Authorities blocked some messaging groups on Chinese WeChat. In the groups, Evergrande investors had talked about protesting against the company. Heavy debt is not only a problem for Chinese companies, but for the whole country. Hidden government debt at the local level in China is now more than half the size of China's economy. That's according to economists at Goldman Sachs. The debt is all wrapped up in local investments that are not reported on by the central government. NTD's Patrick Hayden has the story.
Local government debt in China rose to $8.2 trillion last year, more than triple what it was in 2013. Investment bank Goldman Sachs says it equates to 52% of the country's gross domestic product and more than the official total of government debt. The debt is created from local government financing vehicles, and these don't show on their balance sheets, so the debt is hidden. Local governments usually make money from selling land, but demand has slumped. And Chinese property developer Evergrande's worsening situation will deter buyers in an industry on the edge of a potential collapse. Local government debt mostly consists of construction, transportation and industrial conglomerate debt. Jiangsu province had the largest borrowing in 2020, with nearly $1.25 billion. Tianjin, Beijing, Sichuan, Guizhou and Gansu provinces are the most leveraged. Goldman's study was based on analysing more than 2,000 local government financing vehicle statements and their interest-bearing debt. Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
A blow to China's exports. Shipping rates for freight containers traveling from China to the U.S. have reached a record high. The virus outbreak in several countries slowed container turnaround times. On one of the busiest shipping routes, the China-U.S. East Coast route, the price to ship a container increased 400% compared to last year. In October last year, the price to ship one container was close to $4,000. This month, the price per container rose to close to $20,000. Similarly, shipping freight containers from China to Canada also costs an average of $20,000. The president of China's Port Association says the spike in shipping prices followed a rebound in virus cases in other countries. It slowed turnover speeds at major ports to around 7 to 8 days. These high prices are one-sided, though. Data from freight tracking firm Freightos shows that a shipping container from North America to China costs less than $1,000. China put on an extravagant display of one secret high-end military technology at its largest air show this week. It also broadcasts its growing ambitions in space exploration and for self-sufficiency in commercial aircraft. NTD's Don Ma has more.
China's high-end military technology was on display at its largest air show this week, including models that were once secret. The show is called China International Aviation and Aerospace Exhibition. It kicked off in southern China's Guangdong province on Tuesday. It's usually held once every 2 years. The event showcases the country's growing ambitions in defense, space exploration, and for self-sufficiency in commercial aircraft. Pandemic-related travel restrictions meant the air show was a largely domestic affair. But foreign observers kept a close eye on developments from afar as China builds its military strength. This is because the event showcases Chinese aircrafts that have never been revealed to the public before. Going on display for the first time at the show was J-20 fighter jets with Chinese engines rather than Russian ones. The defense editor at London-based intelligence company Janes said the scope and scale of high-end war-fighting capability on display is a step up from previous shows. China has been working to improve the performance of its domestically made engines, which have lagged behind Western technology. According to the U.S. Department of Defense's 2020 report on China's military power, Beijing's Air Force currently has around 2,000 combat-ready military aircrafts. That's the most in the region, but it still trails behind the U.S. Air Force, which has around 5,000 military aircrafts. Don Ma, NTD News.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.